Today we're taking a different journey, one that looks at the real human impact of U.S. immigration policies and travel bans. For millions, crossing a border isn't about adventure, it's about survival, family, and hope. We'll explore how these policies have upended lives in 10 countries, focusing on the people behind the headlines. Let's dive into the journeys, cut short futures thrown into uncertainty, and the true cost of a closed door. Let's start with Cuba, a nation steeped in history and resilience, an island that has captivated the world's attention for decades. We'll delve into a policy shift that dramatically altered the lives of countless Cubans seeking refuge and opportunity on American shores, and the end of the wet foot, dry foot policy. This policy, a Cold War relic, had offered a unique pathway to residency for Cubans who managed to reach U.S. soil. For years, it served as a beacon of hope, a promise of a new beginning for those fleeing the island's political and economic hardships. For years, Cubans who reached U.S. soil could stay and build new lives, contributing to the vibrant tapestry of American society, particularly in communities like Miami's Little Havana. They established businesses, raised families, and became integral parts of the American fabric. That changed overnight, with little warning, leaving many in disbelief and scrambling to understand the implications. The sudden reversal sent shockwaves through the Cuban community and sparked widespread debate about the future of U.S.-Cuba relations, leaving thousands stranded, caught in a bureaucratic limbo, their fates hanging in the balance. Many had already embarked on perilous journeys, risking their lives in search of freedom and a better future, only to find themselves facing an uncertain destiny, and dreams shattered. The rug was pulled out from under their feet, leaving them grappling with fear, anxiety, and a profound sense of loss. The promise of a new life in America seemed to vanish in an instant. Families who risked everything, enduring treacherous sea voyages and facing unimaginable hardships, found themselves in legal limbo, navigating a complex and often unforgiving immigration system. The sudden policy change created a wave of legal challenges and uncertainty for those seeking to regularize their status, facing deportation or a life in the shadows, forced to live in constant fear of being discovered and separated from their families. The policy shift cast a long shadow over the Cuban community, creating a climate of fear and distrust. The abrupt policy shift didn't just close a door, it slammed it shut. It erased decades of hope and trust, leaving a deep scar on the relationship between the U.S. and the Cuban community. Its severed ties disrupted lives and shattered the dreams of generations. Many who had started families and jobs in the U.S., building lives and contributing to their communities, suddenly faced removal, their lives upended and their futures thrown into jeopardy. The prospect of deportation loomed large, casting a dark cloud over their existence, with nowhere to go. Returning to Cuba was not an option for many, as they had built their lives in the U.S. and feared persecution or hardship back home. The U.S.-Cuba relationship complicated deportations, adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. Diplomatic tensions and political considerations often hindered the process of returning Cuban nationals, trapping people in a legal no-man's land, caught between two countries and facing an uncertain future. They were neither fully integrated into American society nor able to return to their homeland. For many Cubans, the American dream, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, became a nightmare of uncertainty, replaced by fear, anxiety, and a sense of betrayal. The promise of a better life had turned into a struggle for survival. A bureaucratic change became a personal crisis for thousands, leaving a lasting impact on families and communities. The ripple effects of the policy shift continue to be felt today, serving as a reminder of the human cost of political decisions. The devastating earthquake that struck Haiti in 2010 left a nation in ruins, a landscape of unimaginable destruction. Homes were reduced to rubble, infrastructure crumbled, and the lives of countless Haitians were irrevocably altered. The international community responded with aid and support, recognizing the urgent need for humanitarian assistance. In the wake of this catastrophe, the United States government offered a lifeline, Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. This designation provided a legal pathway for Haitians already present in the U.S. to remain and work, offering a sanctuary from the devastation back home. TPS allowed Haitians to rebuild their lives in the U.S., to find stability and opportunity amidst the chaos. Families began to put down roots, children enrolled in schools, and communities flourished. They contributed to the American economy and enriched the social fabric of their new home. But the promise of safety was not permanent. Years later, the U.S. government announced the end of TPS for Haiti, a decision that sent shockwaves through the Haitian community. Suddenly, nearly 60,000 Haitians faced the looming threat of deportation, the prospect of being forced to return to a country still struggling to recover from the earthquake and subsequent crises. This decision disregarded the deep roots these individuals and families had established in the United States, the American-born children who knew no other home, and the significant contributions they had made to their communities. Families who had diligently contributed to American society for years, paying taxes and working hard, were suddenly told to leave, their lives thrown into turmoil and uncertainty. They were forced to confront the agonizing choice of leaving behind everything they had built or living in constant fear of deportation. The reality in Haiti, a nation plagued by persistent political chaos, widespread poverty, and the lingering effects of natural disasters, starkly contradicted the government's claims that it was safe for Haitians to return. The conditions on the ground simply did not support such assertions. Ending TPS didn't just threaten individuals with deportation and separation from their families, it destabilized entire families and communities, disrupting their lives and undermining their ability to thrive. The repercussions of this decision were felt on both sides of the border, impacting families and communities in both the United States and Haiti. The policy callously ignored the permanent lives that had been painstakingly built on what was initially intended to be a temporary status, a status that had become a lifeline for so many. It turned years of resilience and hard work into a climate of fear and uncertainty, and transformed the hope for a better future into profound heartbreak and disillusionment for countless Haitian families. Nicaraguans with TPS had built lives in the U.S. for over 20 years after Hurricane Mitch. The sudden end of TPS forced over 5,000 people to choose between impossible legal hurdles or deportation. Many faced return to a country in political crisis, leaving behind American children and decades of community ties. The decision felt like a broken promise, ignoring the dangers back home. For families, it was a devastating upheaval, security lost in an instant. The program meant to offer relief became a source of anxiety and fear. It showed how quickly stability can vanish for immigrants. Venezuela's crisis forced millions to flee, many seeking asylum in the U.S. Despite condemning the Maduro regime, the U.S. deported Venezuelans back to danger, denying broad protection for years. Many lived in fear, caught between rhetoric and reality, with families separated and lives at risk. Only at the end of the administration did some receive limited protection. Too late for many. The disconnect between policy and humanitarian need was stark. For Venezuelans, the U.S. became a place of uncertainty, not refuge. Their lives became bargaining chips in a political game. El Salvador's Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, was a lifeline. This designation offered a sanctuary to nearly 200,000 individuals who had sought refuge in the United States, fleeing the turmoil and devastation in their homeland. It was more than just a legal status, it was a promise of safety and stability. For decades, this protection allowed them to build families, establish businesses, and deeply integrate into communities across the U.S. They became integral parts of the American fabric, contributing to the economy and enriching the cultural landscape. These weren't just immigrants, they were neighbors, friends, and essential members of society who had woven themselves into the tapestry of American life. But then, the rug was threatened to be pulled out from under them. Ending TPS threatened to tear apart families, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty. The potential consequences were devastating, not only for the individuals directly affected, but also for the communities that had come to rely on their presence and contributions. The policy change forced parents to confront an impossible choice: deportation back to a country still grappling with significant challenges, or the agonizing decision of leaving U.S.-born children behind, potentially condemning them to a life without their parents. This was a cruel dilemma, forcing families to weigh the unbearable options. The justification for ending TPS hinged on the claim that El Salvador had become a safe haven, a notion that completely ignored the reality of rampant violence, persistent instability, and the pervasive threat of gang activity that continued to plague the nation. Deporting such a large number of people risked further destabilizing both countries, potentially overwhelming El Salvador's already strained resources and creating new security challenges. The mass deportation could have had far-reaching and detrimental consequences. Beyond the economic and political implications, the policy threatened to break up generations of families, severing the bonds that held communities together and disrupting the lives of countless children who had only ever known the United States as their home. The policy, in effect, turned a promise of safety and refuge into a looming threat of separation and displacement, leaving families in a state of constant anxiety and uncertainty about their future. It was a betrayal of the trust that these individuals had placed in the American system. Salvadoran families faced the potential loss of everything they had painstakingly built over decades: their homes, their businesses, their livelihoods, and their sense of belonging. The prospect of losing all of this was a devastating blow. The fight to save TPS transcended a mere legal battle. It became a fundamental struggle for their very existence, a desperate plea to remain in the only home they had ever known, and to protect the families they had worked so hard to build. For many, America was home, a place where they had established roots, raised families, and contributed to society, until suddenly it wasn't. The promise of stability was shattered, leaving them in a precarious and uncertain situation. Guatemalans fleeing violence and poverty faced harsher enforcement and new barriers in the U.S. The Safe Third Country Agreement forced asylum seekers back to Guatemala, a country unprepared to protect them. Deportations surged, sending people back to the dangers they'd risked everything to escape. Families were left in debt, marked as targets, and trapped in cycles of desperation. U.S. policy turned the region into a buffer zone, not a place of refuge. The American dream grew more distant, and the journey more perilous. For many, hope was replaced by fear and uncertainty. Honduras, plagued by violence and instability, saw TPS ended for over 86,000 people. Families with U.S.-born children faced deportation to a country even more dangerous than when they left. Rapid deportations overwhelmed Honduras, fueling cycles of violence and poverty. Migrant caravans, often families seeking safety, were portrayed as threats rather than refugees. U.S. policies treated a humanitarian crisis as a law enforcement issue. For many Hondurans, the only escape route was closed, trapping them in danger. The cost was measured in broken families and lost futures. In Afghanistan, thousands who aided U.S. forces were promised safety through special immigrant visas. Under the Trump administration, visa processing slowed, leaving allies stranded as the Taliban advanced. Extreme vetting and bureaucratic delays put lives at risk, turning hope into fear. When the U.S. withdrew, the backlog became a catastrophe. Many allies were left behind. The travel ban and slowdowns trapped people in danger, despite years of service. For Afghan translators and their families, the promise of refuge was broken. The consequences were deadly and deeply personal. It was a tragic chapter of abandonment and lost trust. The travel ban hit Iranians hard, separating families and disrupting lives. Most Iranians were barred from entering the U.S. regardless of personal history or ties. The ban ignored the difference between people and governments, punishing families and students alike. The waiver process was nearly impossible, leaving families in limbo for years. Brief reunions in third countries became the only way to see loved ones. The policy reduced millions to a security threat, erasing decades of cultural exchange. For many, the pain of separation may never heal. The ban's impact was deeply personal and far-reaching. Somalia, long a source of refugees, was hit hard by the travel ban and refugee cap. Families approved for resettlement were left stranded in camps, their hopes dashed. Somali American communities built on reunification were fractured, with loved ones kept apart indefinitely. The security rationale was questionable. Refugees already faced years of vetting. The ban added more barriers, effectively shutting the door on the most vulnerable. For Somali mothers and children, the dream of safety vanished overnight. The message was clear. For some, America's promise no longer applied. The cost was measured in broken families and lost hope. We've seen how a single policy can reshape lives across the globe, families uprooted, dreams deferred, and hope lost. These aren't just statistics. They're stories of resilience, heartbreak, and the fight for a better future. Immigration policies can build bridges or walls. These stories show the human cost of closing doors. Empathy starts with understanding the faces behind the headlines. If you believe in the power of connection, subscribe and help us share these vital stories. Thank you for watching.